All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of Seminoles Sidelines. Our special Labor Day edition is my name's Pat Burnham. I'm joined by Osceola senior writer Kurt Weiler and Osceola managing editor Bob Ferrante. Guys, we have just rolled back in from Orlando, and you guys were busy talking to the players and coaches after the game last night. A epic blowout, second half blowout of LSU by the now eighth ranked Seminoles, and we're going to talk about maybe where they should be ranked a little bit later as the polls will come out tomorrow. But you guys did not get a chance to offer your first thoughts. Obviously, spending time with Mike Norvell's press conference and listening to Brian Kelly's press conference. We'll talk a little bit about the two as we get into this thing. But listen, we have not had the benefit of a rewatch because we were traveling today. And just so the people that are watching now know, we will come back tomorrow night with an extended version of Seminole Sidelines with Mark Salva, Kurt, Bob, myself, after we've had a chance to do what we call Second Watch Sunday, which Mark is in the process of doing on our boards right now. If you'd like to go to the Osceola.com and look at Mark's comments from the first half of the game, they are on Osceola Village. If you don't know who Mark Salva is, Mark Salva was a former starting center for Florida State under Bobby Bowden, offensive line coach at South Carolina for 5 years before going into private business. And because of that, we are lucky enough to have him as a Osceola football analyst. So we do have Second Watch Sunday going on as Mark has started. But guys, you guys have not had a chance to we've kind of talked about it coming back from Orlando today, but just want to get your overall thoughts on or your first impressions of the game last night, which was really a tale of two halves. And the second half was the half that mattered the most, as it often is. And Florida State got after LSU's butt a little bit and beat a nice little football team over there at LSU.
No, yeah, I mean, it was that was the second half for the ages. Like, honestly, frankly, I wrote a story about it last night. What more could you have wanted from that second half? I mean, it was everything. Where the offense was clicking, scoring on 5 straight possessions. I guess 6 if you go back to the
second quarter. Yep.
Yeah. The defense felt like the defense was feeding off the offense. The offense was feeding off the defense. I think we watched this team. The hard part for us was we were all very impressed by what we saw by Florida State in the preseason, but we hadn't seen any of LSU. And even when you're talking to people, you're only getting certain things. You're not getting the full picture. You're not seeing LSU for yourself. You don't know how to compare it. But we were optimistic. None of us optimistic enough to pick a lopsided win. I don't think any of us went to more than 10 points or so. Yeah. Like, I only picked 7. But darn if Florida State wasn't decidedly the better team on that night. I mean, that was a statement and then some.
Yeah, well, listen, Brian Kelly certainly helped out in the first half, leaving at least 6 points off the board. But certainly that played a role. But I'm not even sure that if they had gone in with a 9-point deficit, that they would have been able to hold Florida State off the way they came out firing in all cylinders, offensively and defensively. But Bob, your thoughts on your first impressions from the game last night?
I think we have to remember that week 1 is about winning ugly sometimes. And that first half was both electric and ugly at the same time. You know, historically, Pat, we were talking about this in the car on the drive back. Remember those Florida State Clemson games, those Florida State Miami games, going back to when, you know, the ACC wanted to put those matchups on Labor Day for a reason to elevate, you know, these programs within the conference, and those rivalries. Those were not aesthetically pleasing wins or losses for the opponent of Florida State in those games. But to see, I think Mike Norvell has hammered home this theme. He did it again in the press conference, how you face adversity within games. Again, I thought it was really, really cool. Kurt and I were watching Darnell Dockett, for example, came over to Jared Verse on the sideline right before halftime. Jared Verse's body language was not great there. You know, and Darnell Dockett's coming over to him, encouraging him, giving him some pointers. And you would have wanted to have been a fly on the wall to hear a discussion like that. But to have a guy who's been there and done that, to be able to kind of help through the emotions of a challenging week 1 game. And then you see Jared kind of bounce back. So it was a second half for the ages, as Kurt said. I think if we were ranking some of the best halves that Mike Norvell has had in these now 4 years, they've scored 31 a couple times. North Carolina in 2020, Miami last year. They've had some really good halves, but this one against that opponent in that week 1 setting, high pressure, man, I mean, that was really, really good stuff in the second half.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bob, to your point, and we talked about this a little bit last night, and unfortunately, just for those that you usually watch on YouTube, we had a technical glitch, and there's some rumor that it could be operator error by yours truly. We were only on Twitter and Facebook last night and not YouTube, so I do apologize for that, especially after promoting it on social media that we would be on YouTube. But, we were talking to Mark and Fish last night, and, I think sometimes I remember having it in the same stadium on the same desk, talking to fans about the fact that they didn't like it that the Oklahoma win was not pretty. Well, when you're playing a opponent that has equal talent and equal coaching, and we'll talk a little bit about the equal coaching part too, because we talked a little bit about that on the ride home. Listen, it's not supposed to be pretty, right? I mean, you're not going to play a perfect game generally against a high caliber opponent. And we did see Florida State struggle early, both offensively and defensively. Nothing was crisp. And listen, the stat that stood out to me, and I said this last night, I had a seat where I could actually see the television copy as the game was going on. And they put up this stat that LSU had 24 offensive plays inside Florida State's 50-yard line in the first half. FSU had only 6 in LSU's side of the field. And yet Florida State went in only down 3 points, and nothing seemed to be going right. We saw Jordan Travis not looking like Jordan Travis. And, of course, again, credit to LSU. A lot of good players. They were forcing some pressure. And then, of course, we saw blown coverage that led to LSU's first touchdown, really. It was a long play. They ran a little wheel route out of the backfield or by the slot receiver, and he was wide open. But, listen, I think, I asked Mark and Fish this last night, and I asked you guys the same thing. When you saw that, what were your thoughts going into halftime about this game? And then, conversely, how much credit do you give Mike Norvell and that team? Because, listen, it would have been very easy where they were to go in thinking, oh, my God, we're lucky to still be in this game. They left points on the board, off the board. Brian Kelly took points off the board with 4th and 1 decisions or lack of execution, as he called it. And by the way, I just pulled that clip from Notre Dame where he suggested when they played Florida State that he suggested they execute his whole team. I'm sure there's some rumor of that going on now.
He knew better than to run that back last night. He knew better.
I mean, what were your thoughts going into halftime? And then what were your thoughts about how this team responded in the second half? And I don't think I think one of the parts you're going to tell me is doesn't surprise you because we all think this team enjoys playing together. And I don't think any of us thought they would quit, but just your thoughts at halftime. And then obviously, what are your thoughts about this team as a whole, fighting the good fight and overcoming what was really a lot of adversity from the first half?
It felt a little bit like the pressure was put on their shoulders, by a lot of the players, from Jordan Travis to the drops from Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, the missed assignments, the missed tackles. It, again, felt like a week 1 type of game against a top 10 opponent. So then, Pat, to your point, I think the optimism I had was, hey, Florida State's getting the ball back to start the second half. You get to make your adjustments. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to say, we want the ball. We're going to come out. And what did Mike Norvell say? If we do what we need to do, we score every drive of that second half. And I think that was a really cool thing for him to inspire optimism and motivate instead of, maybe trying to peel the paint at halftime. Coaches can go either way as far as how you use the psychology. Yeah. The 4th down stops. I mean, honestly, the defense had its moments where, man, you were just going, this is poor defensive play, the missed tackles, missed assignments, whatever. But, man, those 4th down stops in that moment, the crowd was super fired up too down at that end. The Marching Chiefs were there. I think the crowd really impacted LSU. I don't think Jaden Daniels saw on those plays a defense that he liked for those play calls either. So maybe there was a little bit of lack of comfort from Daniel's end. But man, I really thought, Florida State, as much as physicality had to be elevated, played with a better mindset, played with a little bit more confidence, I think, in that second half.
Yeah, I would have, to be honest with you, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in both locker rooms because I'm sure they were very tense places. But Kurt, go ahead. Your thoughts going into halftime and obviously about the second half.
We've all been impressed, I think, with Mike Norvell, Alex Atkins, especially the offensive game plans they make. They do a very good job of that, I think, week in and week out. I think we maybe haven't given enough attention to the in-game adjustments we made. And we really saw that last night. I mean, Brian Kelly pretty candidly after the game. So LSU did a great job shutting down counter in the first half. Mekhi Wingo was blowing up a lot of those plays, was getting a lot of pressure on Jordan Travis. And he said afterwards, I haven't gone back and kind of watched how severe this was. I'll definitely do that tonight or tomorrow after practice. But they kind of went to a two-back counter. They put a wrinkle on it. It wasn't something LSU was ready for, and it wasn't something LSU was ever able to counter. I mean, they didn't have a great night running the ball. They ended up a smidge over 100. Jordan did do a ton because he had Harold Perkins spying him all night. But they ended up at, I think, 4.4 yards per carry, which against that team, you will take all day. I mean, no sacks allowed is stellar. It's the second straight year they haven't allowed a sack to LSU. And 4.4 yards per carry, if you're doing that against LSU, you're gonna average 6 or 7 against some teams. I mean, that's a really talented group, even without Mason Smith. And obviously, that was a break for Florida State. Who knows how Mason Smith changes that game? But by the same notion, who knows how Darrell Jackson changes that game? I mean, Florida State was missing one of the better defensive tackles too. So, but no,
well,
I mean,
maybe 11 didn't play a ton. So
yeah,
I mean, really, you could say 1.5 defensive tackles.
Yeah, what Florida State did with, I mean, the run game never was huge, but they did enough where they established the run enough where it did even more for the passing game in the second half. And I mean, you felt like Keon Coleman could have just too smalled those guys. The LSU DBs, they may end up being good DBs, but they were overmatched in game one at the new school for both those starters out wide.
Well, listen, there are a lot of things that we thought were true in the offseason, or particularly in fall camp. Bob's already mentioned one of them. We thought the defensive tackle group would be very strong, very deep, very good. And to your point, LSU could not get the run game going outside of really one long Jaden Daniels run, but particularly in the second half and also particularly on those 2 4th-and-1 plays, you saw where the addition of Braden Fisk and as Kurt mentioned last night, we talked post-game about the fact that Dennis Briggs has finally found a home and seems to be more consistent and certainly has grown into his body. But the defensive tackle group is as good as we thought they were, maybe even a little bit better. And I think if Fabian, if his rep count goes up, you're only going to see a more impressive defensive line. And listen, I don't think Darrell Jackson, unfortunately, is going to get a waiver approved this year. I think we talked about that. We all believe that is probably done, and Darrell will be back next year. But listen, it's still a very good defensive line. I mean, you saw them, as Kurt had said many times in the last, not 24 hours, but they were bear hugging 55 a lot over there. They really like Braden Fisk over there at LSU. They didn't want to block him; they wanted to love up on him.
I think there was a little of that both ways, and I guess they didn't call it both ways. So I guess you take that at the end of the day because at least it's been called both ways. I think there were a few times Florida State guys. But yeah, I think we saw Braden Fisk's impact right away. I agree with you there. I think he was impactful. I think you saw, I mean, Josh Farmer talked all offseason about the lessons he learned in 2022 when he kind of got thrown into the role he did when Fabian Lovett missed the time he did. And I think you saw the impact of that last night. I think was PFF graded him out as the best defensive player on the team, which is not for nothing. He's a guy who is in his money year too, and I thought it was a really nice start for him. He made a few plays well being held, actually.
Yes, he's a hard man. Both those guys are really hard to block. And listen, I was glad that was one thing that we saw bear fruit. We thought, listen, you don't ever know, right? Because they're going against each other. You don't ever, and we saw a team, obviously, based off Brian Kelly's comments, that he believed the hype of his own football team because he thought he had a really good football team. And clearly, as we'll talk about him a little bit later, he did not have so nice things to say about his own football team after the game. But, we mentioned the fact, and I've seen a lot of this about where Harold Perkins was played. We even questioned it going into the game. We asked the LSU guy, why would you move him? Do you agree with the move? You take away one of your best pass rushers. Basically, he was their best pass rusher last year at LSU. Maybe Ojulari was pretty good too, but they moved him inside linebacker. But listen, we have talked all preseason and really since last spring about the fact that this would be FSU's best offensive line certainly since 2019, and probably really go back to 2014, 2015. But 0 sacks against LSU. And I know LSU might not have a first-round defensive end at our first-round pick at defensive end, but they've still got good football players, guys. And no pressure off the edge. Wingo was actually more impressive up the middle. And listen, we had said going into the year that we were more worried about protection inside than outside. But just your thoughts on the offensive line. Jeremiah Byers, Bless Harris, Casey Roddick has one of the best. That's going to be a gift, that little knockdown thing you showed me on the ride back home today. I think that play alone will keep him a Seminole forever. They're going to replay that on social media. But just your thoughts on listen, struggled a little bit in the first half where FSU only produced 39 yards rushing, but they really stayed committed to the run in the second half and obviously allowed no sacks on Jordan Travis, which was one of our keys of the game. But just talk about your impressions of the offensive line.
I mean, they told us going in they were going to play guys. That's kind of been the talk all preseason. We would ask, like, how close are you to a starting five? And Alex Atkins would always said multiple times, we're going to play guys. And they did. I think Keandre Jones played the entire second half. I think Darius Washington subbed in some. And I think who else am I missing? Bless Harris subbed in for Robert Scott, who got the start.
Bless played a ton, yep.
Bless ended up playing much more than Rob. I'll be curious what I think we're hoping to talk to Alex Atkins tomorrow. What of that was planned going in versus what of that was a guy picked up a knock or a guy was feeling winded or who knows. Yeah. I'll be curious like what he's willing to share about that. But whoever was out there, I mean, they darn if they didn't get the job done. I was really impressed with. I mean, the improvements in the second half. It's hard not to attribute some of that to Keandre Jones, who, if we're being honest, I think we viewed coming out of spring and really throughout the preseason as kind of the lowest of the three transfers they brought in, and probably that eighth guy in the room. He's not been the most impressive practice player, but you could make the case that maybe he's a gamer because when he went in there last night, I forget if he was at left or right guard, but he did the improvement, not just from him, but maybe he played a role in was noticeable. And so that group is it is great for Florida State because at some point knocks are going to happen for guys to have 8 guys you feel good about.
Well, listen, and I will say this: we were worried about one part of Keandre's game, right? Pass protection. We had said that he was a good run blocker, and listen, what do they do when they put him in the game? They stay committed to the run. More so, listen. If you would have told me that they were going to hold LSU to 0 sacks before this game, I would have told you were crazy. I would have bet my salary on them having at least 1 sack. Listen, that was another thing that was validated. And he's actually given us, usually when we talk offensive football at Florida State, and we're still going to talk about him, it's usually Jordan Travis. And Jordan Travis was certainly a huge part of the story. But, guys, we have sat there practice after practice after practice and talked about Keon Coleman. And I'm just going to say that, and I'm going to let y'all talk. Keon Coleman.
The real deal. I mean, honestly, I was almost afraid that we were building him up so much, but I thought we saw it so consistently through camp. And I think we did see it at Michigan State with those YouTube highlights that we had watched too. I felt like if Florida State had put out the highlights of his best 10 catches in August camp, it probably would have set FSU Twitter ablaze with excitement over what Keon Coleman was going to do. Again, we knew the mismatches were going to be something to watch for Florida State against those LSU corners in particular. But when you have Johnny Wilson, when you have Keon Coleman, you've also got Jaheim Bell, Kyle Morlock, keep going on all the way down the line of all the various mismatch options. What does it do? It takes away the opportunity. You can't double everybody, to steal Jaheim Bell's words and to steal the coaching axiom. It is what it is. You've got mismatches. So I love to see what Keon did, just because he felt like every time the ball was in the air, it was going to be his. And what was he targeted? Something like 12 times, like he had 8 catches. I mean, he really took advantage of all those opportunities. And one of the most impressive FSU debuts we've ever seen. I mean, up there with a Jameis Winston type of debut, just as far as a wow first game.
Well,
listen, he told us in the preseason, and he tweeted again this morning, ain't no 50-50 balls. I thought I established that already. He sees them as 80-20 balls, or maybe even, 100-0, and they kind of were. I think we knew his contested catch ability, and it was remarkable to see it last night. And frankly, I think we saw, for as much as people talked about his athleticism, we heard all preseason about the knowledge. How he got here in May or June, and how quickly he learned everything, to where he played more plays than any other receiver last night. He was on the field for 56, I think, of the 68 plays. Very, very quickly. He has a full knowledge of the playbook. And it's not a Jimbo level playbook, and that helps. I don't think you could learn Jimbo's playbook in 2 or 3 months, not the whole Waffle House order sheet. But it's impressive what he did. He has come here with a mission of boosting that draft stock, becoming that guy. There was buzz about him even before the season. I know guys like the Athletic Stain Brugler was all over, all over boosting him as a potential first-round guy. He is going to be a unanimous first-round pick to me after that game, and it's hard not to see him building on that.
Yeah, well, let's enjoy him while he's here, because he's not going to be here long.
But listen, if you're Mike Norvell, you are okay with that rental.
That's right. Listen, and that's where we are in college football, right? Now Mike hasn't taken a ton of one and dones, but certainly, and listen, he's got an extra year of eligibility. Maybe he stays. I'm not going to dampen everybody's. You're going to want to take all the bluster off this thing, but listen, he's as good as we thought. He might be just like Braden Fisk. He might be better than we thought he was going to be, but certainly, I think my favorite thing, and I did not see it during the game, was when he called his shot on that second touchdown. Well, I believe what was his second touchdown, when he said, "Jordan, just throw it to me." And listen, if you go back and watch that play, which I saw during, I didn't see the throw it to me thing, but I did see the play and replay, and the guy actually had pretty good coverage. And not only does he have soft hands, he's got strong hands. That guy tried to armbar the ball out of his hands and could not do it. But yeah, listen, you always worried, are you overhyping, or are they overhyping? We go back, 3 years ago, Mark and I did a breakdown of his high school tape with Des Hill, and there was another Louisiana receiver that was a highly sought after prospect at that time. And, our favorite was Keon. Did we know he was going to be this? No, I don't think we did, but we certainly liked him coming out of high school before he went to Michigan State. But anyway, Keon Coleman, everything we thought he'd be. And I think he's probably going to be one of those guys when he leaves here that you don't have to use his last name when you're talking about Florida State football if he continues to do this. And I was the only one on the staff that said Florida State's going to have a 1,000-yard receiver. We're off to a good start. So
10th of the way there, a little more, like 12% of the way there.
We got a long way. There's a lot of water. It's got to be tread. But we got 2 with 100. Johnny Wilson had 7 for 104 and could have had a heck of a lot more. We need to get some stick in one of those gloves for old Johnny.
Some Blitnikoff stick him.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That is exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so let's get to our man, Jordan Travis. We're always going to talk about Jordan because he is one of the most dynamic playmakers in college football and is surrounded by even more weapons than he's ever had before. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and say he had a terrible first half where he was 14 of 21 for 174, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Should have had another interception. Got lucky. I think we're all. I think we've talked about this, but I want you guys to expound on it. We think the offense was not clicking on all cylinders in the first half and maybe trying to force things because he's made things happen so naturally. But both throws are not, you don't see him make a ton of those. You've seen some 50-50 balls intercepted in the past downfield, but you don't usually see him make those mistakes. But just your thoughts on the fact that when he came back in the game, and I've got this stat written somewhere, he was 9 of 10 for 168 in the second half with 2 TDs, and he was 1 incompletion. Really, technically, but it was a design quarterback run, a naked boot, where somehow they brought pressure off the left, what would be the offense's left side as he's running right, and he just throws it at Jaheim Bell's feet not to take a loss. He was actually perfect in the second half because that's what he should have done with the ball. But anyway, talk about Jordan Travis.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was a little surprising to see what happened in the first half. That was not. I mean, Jordan was pretty much cool, calm, collected just about all of last season. There was the occasional moment, but there weren't many stretches like what we saw in that game. And like you said, I think some of that's a testament to LSU. I think some of it, I mean, it's possible that's the first game jitters. Maybe it's the expectations of the team Jordan's feeling. Maybe it's the individual expectations Jordan's feeling of kind of how he's been talked about, how he's been billed as a potential Heisman guy. But from that moment, I mean, I saw the series. I know he was talking to A.J. Duffy on the sideline after almost throwing that pick deep in his own end. He talked to A.J. Duffy. Mike Norvell talked to him. He went out there, and, I mean, he in that moment kind of transformed for the rest of the game. He was basically perfect from there. You talked about the pass plays. He didn't have many runs, but I don't think I appreciated enough live. It bears mentioning the touchdown run he had. I forget what that made. Maybe 40. Was that like 38, 30? I think it was 38-17. I think it made it. He must have eyes in the back of his head, because if you watch that play, he's turned his back fully to run what is a read option play. And there's a guy coming off the left side towards him, off left tackle. And somehow he senses the guy without looking and fakes him out and walks into the end zone. I mean, if you go back and watch that play, it's remarkable. I mean, it didn't look like he was going to back it up last night. It looked like, I mean, he wasn't going to lose his Heisman candidacy on that night, but it looked like the moment was a little too big for him for a while. And nope, it's the same old 5 touchdowns. No big deal, Jordan Travis.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Bob, I'll let you talk. I got a chance to talk about Jordan last night.
Honestly, enjoy it. One last ride for Jordan. He's super fun to watch. I don't want to echo everything you guys are saying, but again, I think this is the adversity storyline. Again, it's been Jordan's career. Kurt kind of wrote the story of how Jordan's career has mirrored his games against Brian Kelly, facing Notre Dame, facing LSU these last 2 years. Jordan can fight through and maybe not let that mistake linger. You know, that, hey, my last pass was not very good. My last decision was not very good. Okay, what's the next play? Move forward. I think that's part of that kind of mental maturation, just his mindset. Yeah, he made some really dumb mistakes. I mean, that could be interception backed up in his own end is like, wow. I mean, you don't expect that kind of thing from Jordan. But for him to again regroup, thought the game plan again in the second half helped him out, because you're focusing on the run and utilizing the run game to complement what he does with his feet and through the air. It was not one of Jordan's best games overall, but I think it was one of Jordan's best second halves. And look back over his halves that he's had. Again, same as we talked about earlier with Mike Norvell's best halves. Jordan has shown that he can do this. He can put 30 really good minutes of football out there and lead a team.
He didn't get to play a ton of second halves last year. He might have missed it a little bit.
Yeah, he's probably not going to play a ton of second halves.
He might not play a ton this year. You're right on. Honestly, hopefully he plays a lot of third quarters to bolster his Heisman candidacy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't think, especially the next 2 weeks, I'm not. Listen, they put 45 on a LSU team that's probably going to be a bowl team. I don't know. Brian Kelly may say he's going to beat the heck out of everybody and have to eat crow, which apparently is his favorite meal, especially when he plays Florida State. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second.
Let me just say it's nice that after a off season of rival fans doing a whole bunch of trolls about how Mike Norvell, for as great as last year was, didn't beat a single ranked team. To change that so emphatically week 1. I mean, it's a stupid talking point to begin with because they're using it they're not ranked at the time you played them. Not like LSU was a ranked team.
Right.
They weren't ranked when they played. But that team is ranked because they were ranked at the end of the year when it matters.
Which,
but it's nice
probably more important. Yes.
It's nice to put that to bed.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not surprised that it wasn't 2 to 6 points difference, but I'm not sure I saw them beating LSU like this. And I think it's going to 8 yards rushing in the second half for LSU after rushing for 105 in the first. Incredible work by the defense. Ball control by we always talk about Mark Salva gets mad at me all the time because I don't want to talk about complimentary football. But they happened to play. It wasn't, they came back out in the second half. The offense controlled the ball for 19 and a half minutes, Kurt?
It was almost 2-1. It was almost 20.
LSU had 23 total plays in the second half. I mean, that's it. Rushed for 8 yards, threw for 167, I think. But, one of those big plays was a blown coverage. One of them was in the game when they had 11 freshmen in the ball game. I think that last touchdown, that was a big part of they count, right? I mean, whatever. But the game was over when that play happened, and you had a bunch of freshmen in the game. So really just dominant on both sides of the ball in the second half, and particularly the fourth quarter, and that's what championship football teams do. They close, and Florida State is closed. I do want to talk. I haven't had a chance to hear what Mike said after the game. What were y'all's takeaways from what Mike Norvell said after the football game?
I thought the adversity thing again was an underlined, storyline. Our friend Tom D'Angelo from the Palm Beach Post made a little bit of an attempt at the Brian Kelly comments of beat the heck out of Florida State when he asked Keon Coleman, Jordan Travis, Mike Norvell. None of them took the bait. I thought that was very, very interesting for them to take the high road. Now, what they'd say on social media, a little bit different, but in the end, they didn't offer anything inflammatory back. But honestly, I thought there is praise for everyone. For example, Mike Norvell praising the offensive line, Jordan Travis praising teammates, Jordan praising Keon thanking Mike Norvell, and Mike Norvell looking at him and saying, "I'm glad you're here, man." So cool little moments like that, I think, just to kind of show just a little bit of a glimpse of how close this team is. Yes.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of quiet confidence, it feels like, from Mike Norvell, from a lot of the players during preseason, but there haven't been. I think they've done a really good job of avoiding a lot of the quotables, avoiding the Brian Kelly, we're going to beat the heck out of them that he dropped on Thursday night that's now being thrown back in his face quite a bit. But I think that comes from they felt really good about this team, but there is that little bit of until you see how they are against what you think is another really good team, you're not exactly sure, really, until you see them against someone else, period. To do what they did, I think there was a big sense of validation of, I think Mike knew they were good. I think it's confirming they have the chance to be really good. He said a lot of the right things over, and he's right. A lot of things they can do better. That was not, for as impressive a win as that wasn't Florida State's A game. But he kind of said it was a first step. It was a big step, but it was a first step and kind of pushed forward to the future.
Well, listen, it was a huge step in the way the season could play out because of where they were on the schedule, who's left on the schedule. You really got what should be 2 tune-up games leading up to Clemson. But listen, to your point, I do think that this team is kind of reflective of Mike, right? Mike's not a huge talker when it comes to the opposition. He's always very not friendly is not the right word, respectful of what he says about the opponent each and every week. And then I think he said, I think the one thing I did hear him say about what Brian Kelly said was he said, well, it's just nice to get a chance to play the game, right? I think he said something to that effect. I think that's just how he addressed it. And I think that's where Keon and the other guys took their lead as far as their post-game comments.
He was relieved. They knew about it. They definitely knew about it.
Oh,
but he was relieved that they took the high road. And you should take the high road if you're there. You made your statement on the field. You do not need to punch down after doing that and follow up with something. I think Mike Norvell, because he tensed up when that happened. He was nervous that quote was happening. I think he was quite relieved that that both players took the high road.
Well, we were made aware of something that Brian Kelly said to Mike Norvell before last year's game that kind of got put a saddle under the spur under the saddle of the Seminoles going into that game, and then why he would come out and say anything like that after losing last year, knowing that this is Florida State's best football team under Mike Norvell. Again, I'll say this: he must like crow for dinner, and I think his Southern accent is in jeopardy of being worn out there in Baton Rouge. He is arrogant, even when you put him in his place. He did not give FSU much credit in his post-game press conference. It was mostly about the fact that he didn't coach well enough, and what I think he meant was his coaches didn't coach well enough. I think it's a rough day in those staff meeting rooms in Baton Rouge because he threw his offensive line coach under the bus, his secondary coach under the bus. I would not, and I got a good buddy on that staff. I would not want to be on that staff room. But just your thoughts on number one, his arrogance going into the game, thinking that they were just going to beat the shit out of Florida State, and then getting his ass handed to him. Over there, lost in space look over there on the sideline that's now a meme. I'm pretty sure that he got busy watching the damn skyrocket take off instead of watching his football team because they were all distracted doing something. But anyway, your thoughts on Brian Kelly and what he had to say post-game.
Okay. I think Brian Kelly is a very good coach. He's won national titles. We're not going to take anything away from him. We disagree with some of his fourth down decisions. We disagree with not praising Florida State enough. Some of his comments could have been more. The opponent just did a much better job in certain situations instead of it was LSU's shortcomings. It was LSU's lack of coaching. I was disappointed with how Brian Kelly handled that. I also is there just a little bit of Brian Kelly is an arrogant coach in that he's been at Notre Dame. He's now at an SEC school. There's this SEC aura over all their programs, and Florida State's in that little old ACC conference. And there's still maybe not enough current respect for how far Florida State has come. And maybe that permeates from Brian Kelly down through players and assistants and staff. I know that's maybe a little bit crazy. I just think there's just too much arrogance from Brian Kelly for me, honestly.
He was very confident about his team based on what he'd seen in the preseason. I mean, there were some concerns that kind of came out about the secondary, and those were, I think, on display last night. But maybe he was confident. Maybe he'd seen improvement from Jaden Daniels. Maybe all those receivers have been playing at a high level. Maybe that defensive line, even when Mason Smith wasn't out there, was being impactful. But let's be real. It was crazy for Brian Kelly to take that stance when, let's be real, he's been outcoached the last 2 years by Mike Norvell. In 2021, he had a top 15 Notre Dame team. Florida State coming off a 3-6 season, and that game went to overtime. And Florida State nearly knocked off Notre Dame. And that Florida State team didn't go to a bowl. That was not a great Florida State team. Last year, LSU had a more talented team, top to bottom, I would say. Florida State wins that game. It shouldn't have come down to the extra point. This year was definitely as close, I would say, as close as we've seen to a level playing field of talent. And when that happened, look what happened.
Well, listen, he also said something earlier before that about he gets revenge, right? He's made two comments. He made two comments before this game about he doesn't lose twice or something, something like that.
Yeah, he had another one. I get even, I think it was, or something.
Yeah, I get even. And listen, I was so happy to see his face turn red over there. Listen, it was fun to watch the Bayou Bengals get beat, and it was fun to watch this team overcome adversity and really play complimentary football, Mark Salvo, wherever you are, if you're watching in the second half. And listen, we also said that if Florida State could stop the run, pin their ears back, and get after Jaden Daniels, they might put this team away. And that's exactly what they did. Kurt, what was the pressure numbers that you had?
They had 23 pressures, more than last year. And we think that LSU line's a lot better than it was last year because they no longer have true freshmen playing their first game at offensive tackle spots. But yeah, they had 23 pressures, like 22 last year's game,
and 4 sacks. So they stopped the run, they got it done, which is they're supposed to do. So we had a lot of our keys. We had 12 keys. We each picked 2. Now some of them are obviously similar, but listen, they hit on about all those keys. And they won the kicking game again. They made their field goal and they created a turnover on the special teams. Unfortunately, no points. But listen, certainly essentially took a possession away from LSU. You can make that argument, one way or the other. But anyway, yeah, fascinating game. I did not think it would be a 21 point difference?
It was 28.
Yeah, I thought a blowout might be 14 points either for both teams. So, but anyway, great start to the season for Florida State. Guys, we're going to end with a couple of things, but the first thing I want to ask you guys is the polls are coming out to Kurt tonight or tomorrow?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Tomorrow afternoon. Okay. So that's right, because we got one more game tonight. We get to see if the Dukies can upset the Tigers. So we'll be watching that. And I know, listen, this has turned into a 4-minute drill instead of a 2-minute drill. So I apologize about the title of the show, but listen,
people are clearly loving it.
Yeah, this is it's good stuff to talk about. And as a reminder, we will be back tomorrow night with what we're now going to call the second watch version of Seminoles Sidelines, when we have a chance to watch the game again, and maybe that will be a shorter show since we've covered so much tonight. But tomorrow the polls come out. Going into this, the teams in front of Florida State were Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, which will certainly not be in front of Florida State come tomorrow. Penn State, and those were the 7 in front of them. Georgia played a patsy. Michigan played East Carolina. I mean, East Carolina has gone in and beat some folks before, and they're not a Power 5 program, but they're no slouch to playing these types of people. Alabama, Ohio State, which they played to open up with a conference game. So we'll take that into account. Alabama rolled over, I don't know who. USC won again, I believe. Did they play? I don't even know. Anyway, USC's in front of them. Then Penn State looked really good against West Virginia. So I'm going to ask you guys this. If you were voting tonight or tomorrow on the top 10 or top 5, where would you put Florida State in the polls tomorrow?
I said before the game that I thought Florida State could flip-flop with LSU if it were a tight game. So we could see Florida State easily go to 5. Are they going to jump somebody else? Does Florida State pass the eye test, because so many eyeballs were watching this as an exclusive Sunday night game? All the voters were probably watching this, just like everybody's going to be watching at least this Monday night game to see what Clemson does. How does Clemson look? I don't know if they are in the top 4. Are people maybe voting thinking, is this a playoff team? But hey, after 1 week, Florida State looks like a team that can win an ACC title and maybe be in the playoff.
Considering I was saying Saturday afternoon, I think to you, Pat, that I hope people don't overreact and put Colorado in the polls after what they did in week 1. I feel like I have to preach the same thing about Florida State. I think they should be in the 4 or 5 range. I mean, let's be real. That was the most impressive win in the country this season, probably by a pretty wide margin. I mean, Penn State beat West Virginia. It might be the next most impressive win of that bunch, and that's not the same, because that's a bottom tier Power 5 team right now, not a top tier Power 5 team they're going against. Yeah, but they'll get their chance. I mean, these things take time. Florida State will get its due if they go into Clemson at the end of the month and do anything close to what they did Sunday night. And they will definitely, I mean, other teams will play games where they have a chance of losing, because really no one else in the top 10 outside of maybe Penn State had much of a chance of losing this weekend. So we'll let things sort itself out. I think they'll be in the 4. I think they might be 5, honestly, and who knows, but they should move up.
I said last night, without benefit of having the poll in front of me, I thought they would be to 3. I do think I think Penn State and Florida State will move in front of USC, LSU. So I think 3-6 is probably right. I think they should go in front of Ohio State. Both those schools should go in front of Ohio State.
Yes.
I think Florida State should bypass Penn State based on opponent. I do think that. So I think it's going to be Georgia, Michigan, probably Alabama. But if Florida State ended up in front of Alabama, I would not be surprised based on the fact that they beat the 5th ranked team in the country. And these are the same guys that voted for that, right? So I think they deserve to be in front of Alabama based on opponent, in front of Ohio State, so in front of Penn State, really. So I would put them at 3, but I agree with you guys. I think it's 4-6 is more than likely. But they beat the team that was supposed to be – I mean, I think the percentages were close on preseason predictions between LSU and Alabama to win the West. Obviously, a lot of people gave LSU the nod because of all the returning starters, particularly the quarterback. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the polls come out with tomorrow. And that was the AP poll I was reciting. I don't know if the coaches' poll is exactly the same. But, yeah, I think it's fascinating. Listen, I want to ask you guys this question. I was thinking about this while we were riding back from Orlando today. I didn't ask y'all, so I'm going to give you this. I mean, we could talk about it tomorrow if we want, but it's a good question to end on. We had talked about the explosive nature of this offense and what we expected to do. We saw it put 45 up rather easily, particularly in the second half against LSU. Now you've got Southern Miss and Boston College coming up. If I gave you the over-under of 122 points being scored the next 2 ball games to combine, would you take the over or the under?
The under, because I think there will be some foot taken off the gas. They could easily do it. I mean, they could score 200 quite possibly if they really wanted to. But I think that both games will be decided by halftime, and there will be some coasting. So I'll take the under only for that reason.
All right. Well, listen, we're gonna wrap it up there. Do y'all have any final thoughts you want to share as we get ready to wrap it up?
Hey, let's jump in here because we just got the approval to run a promo for new subscribers from the Rivals folks. So the quick teaser is go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. If you are a new subscriber, jump in, use code FSU4524. Really easy to remember because that was a score, 45-24 last night on Sunday. Again, the code is FSU4524. You will get 1 year of the Osceola for $45.24. Obviously, a really good discount.
Screen.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'd love for you to do that. If you listen to our YouTube channel, which we certainly appreciate, or watch us on Twitter or Facebook, we do feel like we have a lot of good content on the Osceola. Kurt, Bob, and myself and Jerry are at practice just about every day. At least we're at practice every day. Most of the time, all of us, we have daily practice reports. Obviously, we have Charles Fishbein on our recruiting team. We just added Nick Carlisle to our team, who will be helping with a lot of things, including social media and obviously some recruiting work. So we got a lot of good information there. We've got their PFF grades are now posted, Kurt. You did a story on that on the ride home. I was
a column, a Keon Coleman story, recruit reactions from last night. More of that probably. I mean, it's we had we had 2 back-to-back sales during preseason camp where I tried to say, I think this team's going to be good. I think you want to hop on board. I understand if you wanted to see it for yourself. You've now seen it for yourself. I encourage you pretty strongly to jump on and enjoy this, what should be a really fun season of coverage on the Osceola.
Yeah, and I will say this. I know there's probably people out there watching this show that subscribe to other services that cover Florida State, and that's fine. I don't think you can listen, I'm a fan of Florida State. I like to be as educated as I can. At 45-24 for 1 year, I think for most people it's affordable, and I think we offer a unique perspective on covering Florida State. Kurt's been on the beat for years. Bob's been on the beat for years. Jerry was here when they planted the first tree at Florida State. He knows more about Florida State history than anybody.
We're gonna get that on T-shirts. That's the next Osceola T-shirt. Jerry was here.
Planted the first tree, so he has been here since. I think Jerry was the first male student at Florida State.
He was banging down the doors. He said, "Let me in, let me in."
Yeah. And for you guys that don't know, that is Jerry Cutts, who owns the Osceola. He originally started the Osceola in 1982, sold it in 1999. I was vice president of Seminole Boosters for about 20 years before he decided to come back over and start covering Florida State again. Then, of course, we got Charles Fishbein, who has been covering the recruiting industry for as long as I can remember. He owns Elite Scouting Services, is located in South Florida, and does a tremendous job. He's also fun to follow on the boards if you're a board person. Fish is full of personality, and Fish and I will get in the occasional fight on first impressions and reeling them in about many, many things. So, but it's all good. And then, of course, last but not least, we have some former players that get involved with us from time to time, including Mark Salva, who was a starting center for Bobby Bowden, and obviously he was a member of the coaching staff on the 1993 National Championship team as a graduate assistant, then coached at South Carolina. And then I'm lucky enough they let me have a say-so from time to time, and obviously I have played a little bit of ball myself and spent 10 years in coaching. So we feel like we have a unique team of people. We do think at 45-24, it's a great way to celebrate the LSU win if you're an FSU fan, and we do feel like that you will love what you get a chance to read. And again, I've never understood I only belong to one website, because I think you can belong to all websites for about $20 a month. So it's probably less than that, to be honest with you. It is with our special, and I know they run special. And listen, I think we love the other guys. We have great working relationships with them, but we do think that we have a neat perspective at the Osceola. So please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and use FSU 4524 as your code for your discount. For $45.24 a month, you get a year subscription to the Osceola. As I said earlier tonight, we will be back tomorrow, possibly with a shorter show, possibly with a longer show. You never know. We are running on adrenaline. We all went to bed at 4:00 this morning in Orlando, Florida, and we enjoyed the win for a couple hours as a team in the condo we rented there in Orlando, and had a good time reliving the game and listening to Jerry expound on various subjects as we went through the night. So anyway, we'll be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. with Mark Salva. He will be joining us. He will, and we also, again, have the Second Watch Sunday already going on. We should have called it Second Watch Monday, but we're a little tired. But it is generally called Second Watch Sunday. But Mark has started that on the Osceola.com, Osceola Village Forum. He's worked his way through the first half, and Kurt, Bob, and I will continue to do that as we maybe catch a quick power nap and then wake up to watch the Duke Clemson game, and be fun to watch that game. But we want to thank you for joining us, Kurt and Bob. I appreciate it. Did not mean to keep you so long, but I love getting y'all's insight on Florida State. And listen, it's always fun to talk about a Florida State win, particularly against LSU, which has become a pretty ordinary thing around Tallahassee under Mike Norvell. So we will see you guys tomorrow night. Have a great night. Enjoy the final. Look, Kurt's got his Camping World Stadium hat on.
Get on the camera. There it is. Yep. Shout out Camping World for the swag.
I think if FSU ever has a game it doesn't play in Tallahassee, it needs to play it down there. They're pretty good in Orlando. So anyway, guys, have a great night. Kurt, Bob, and thank you guys on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook for listening. And we'll be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern with Mark Salva to get his thoughts on Seminoles after his second watch. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.